Sparrow, welcome to Unbroken. I am very honored that you're here today to share your story as a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. I think it's really important that all of us begin to share what happened to us and speak the truth, because the people that have done this to us and do this to other children, they operate on deception and secrecy. So once we begin to share these stories, my agenda is so that we can stop other children from going through what we went through. So I know it takes a lot of courage to be here on air and to talk about your story. So I'm very grateful that you're willing to be here and talk to me today. So thanks, Sparrow, and welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm also very grateful that you are open to hearing this and have created a space where this information can be shared. So I appreciate you inviting me here. Thanks.
So what about if we start with you basically tell us your story, you know, kind of like what happened, how did it happen, you know, the things that you've been able to remember and put together.
Okay. Well, I grew up in New York City in a suburb of, well, not a suburb, but a borough of New York called Queens, New York. And both my parents were Irish immigrants who immigrated to this country and then met in New York when they were in their 20s in the Irish social scene that was in Manhattan and New York at the time. My father had been in the military when he first came. I think he came to this country and went directly into the military. He was in the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army, which a veteran later told me that was a highly trained and tested part of the military. It was considered special forces. He was a paratrooper. And then he left, and I don't think he was in for very long, but I'm not sure on that. But he did leave at some point and then eventually became a businessman. And he and his partner ended up owning 3 bars in the New York area. And that was around that time that he met my mother. And my mom had come to this country as a nun. And she became a novice in Ireland, where she grew up at a very young age, 14 she became. And they, I think part of the offer the nuns were making was that she would be taken to Paris to go to high school. And she did. She was taken to Paris, but she didn't stay there the full 4 years of high school. It was shortened from this is what my mother has told me. And then she was sent to New York to study to be a teacher and to work, I guess, as a teacher, as a nun. And when she got to New York, she began to get very disillusioned with convent life. She said there were a lot of changes going on in the church at the time. It was the 60s. And there were a lot of changes being made that she didn't like. She told me she felt really spiritually called. And one thing she told me was they allowed nuns to have televisions in their rooms, which had never been done before. And she said she felt the church was falling away from the more spiritual focus, especially the nuns and everything. So she had an elderly spiritual advisor who gave, I think it was another nun, who gave her permission if she felt called to leave. And then I think she wrote a letter to the Pope at the time, and he also responded that you're free to go or something. I guess she needed that, you know. So she left and became a social worker. And she was actually placing children in adoption in homes, you know, homes. And but she and my dad met, and it was a whirlwind romance. Like now I'm old enough to know it was pretty dysfunctional. I think they had just 2 or 3 dates, and he asked her to marry him and she said yes. And so I was their firstborn child. They had been married a year. And my mother did tell me that she pretty much had figured out that my dad was an alcoholic during that year. He would come home after working long hours in his bars and be very verbally abusive to her. He'd turn off the TV, and it got so bad she was developing a stutter. She told me this, and then she said, but after a year, when I was born, she felt she couldn't leave the marriage. She kind of just said, well, then you came along. And the impression was I got she felt stuck in the marriage. So I grew up and it was quite, I do remember violence. One of my earliest memories is we had a home with a swinging door into the kitchen. And I remember coming down at night because I guess I had heard some ruckus downstairs from my bedroom. And I remember pushing open the swinging door and the lights were out, it was dark, it was gloomy. And I could see my mother throwing dishes at my father in the gloom. And I remember saying something and her response was pretty typical. She said, Mary, there's nothing wrong. Don't worry, go back up to bed. And it was this kind of contradictory messages I got all my life. Like, there's nothing wrong here. We're a good family. And deny your perceptions and go back to bed. So, and when I was around the age of 4, also I'd like to say I remember being depressed as a child. I remember the police being called about my father's violence. I remember him being drunk when he came home from work, and the stress and the violence in the air, kind of when the tension in the air when he was there. And when I was 4, I have very clear memories of being depressed at a very young age because my mother was also a workaholic. She told me later that she really believed if she was a better housewife, my dad might not drink so much. And so she threw herself into cleaning the house, having these beautiful dinners, wearing beautiful outfits, and she kind of neglected me. She didn't want a messy child. She didn't want to deal with that. So I was getting hit a lot as a kid, and I was also the neglect. And I have a very clear memory of lying under the dining room table. I used to like to sit under there. It was my little house. And I was laying on the floor, and I remember I was listening to the sound of the air conditioner. It was making all these weird noises. And this wave of depression came over me when I thought of my mom. And I remember thinking to myself as a child, she loves the house more than she loves me. And so, yeah, but I was bright, and my mom pushed me academically. That was one thing she was really good at. She instilled a love of learning in me. Every week we'd go to the library and get the maximum amount of books we could get, and she'd read them to me over the week. And I was given French lessons as a small child and music lessons. And there was this, because my dad was making money from his businesses and I think other things. But we had the money to pay for things like that. So, and there was a sense of, I was expected to perform well academically. I was told, you come from a family of intelligent people, you know, and so I did grow up with that kind of, which could be a burden at times, you know, this high expectations and to function well, you know. So there was things going on with my father starting when I was 4. My mother told me she was very overwhelmed with her new child. She had a new baby when I was 4. And my dad told her that he was going to be taking me to work with him at the age of 4. And my dad at the time, which is bizarre for me, when I heard this, I remember I think I was younger when my mother told me this, because I had no memories at the time of my dad taking me to work with him. And I remember when she looked at me, she said, he was taking you to work with him a lot. And she said it in this really loaded way, kind of that she did not feel comfortable with what was going on. But she told me she was so, she really believed it was her duty as a good wife to obey her husband and support her husband, that she allowed him to take me. And so, well, I grew up, all my memories of what was going on with my father and his associates were deeply repressed in my childhood. I had absolutely, and I realize now it was because I had to function as a child, a normal child around my mother, and go to school and get good grades and do my homework. And, you know, so I think it was a big defense mechanism because there was no one I could talk to about what was going on. My mom was very invested in us being a good family.
Yeah.
Being perceived as a good family. I mean, she really wanted it. I think it was her dream, you know, to have a nice family. But what her way of dealing with signs that our family wasn't good, or, you know, was to deny or repress any signs. She told me a story once that when I was very young, like at the age of 3, I was making very disturbing drawings with my crayons. Very dark colors, purple, black, red. And it upset her. But her approach to dealing with it was to take away all my dark crayons. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't express. There was no sign, there was no trace that anything was wrong.
I just want to say, Sparrow, that is so typical, where for a lot of survivors, where there's like this surface life that looks kind of good. You know, I had that too. My mom would dress us in the most perfect clothing, and we would go to the country club and play tennis and travel to beautiful places. And yet on the other side, this horrific stuff was going on. So that is pretty classic. And I think it helps repress the memories, because you're like, wait, you know, you as a child, you can't really hold both. So you put away the things that are too big and suppress them until a later time. But interestingly, you were already drawing traumatic things at 3. So things were happening. So So when your dad started taking you to work, I'm guessing that's where the big abuses started to occur, right?
Yeah, he was sexually doing inappropriate things with me when I was young in the house.
Oh,
And those memories came back first when my memories started coming back. And actually I got confirmation from an aunt at the time. I guess I'll jump around a little bit. Around the age of 40, I started to have these memories come back of my father abusing me in my childhood home. And it was huge for me because I really didn't think anything like that had happened, but the way the memories came back was so powerful that I was like, it was just intense. And anyway, so at the time I was in 12-step, and I was 12-step meetings, recovery, and I had a meditation practice. And I remember asking the universe for help. Like, what do I do with this? I'm not even sure it's true. These memories of my dad hurting me. And also I had very specific images of him. Like, he used to burst into my room very upset and angry, looking for me. And that usually happened right before I was being abused sexually by him. Like, he seemed really upset. And so when my memories came back, I was like, what do I do? And I got an intuition to call my mother's sister, who, when I was growing up, she was the only member of my mom's family who lived in the United States. Everyone else was back in Ireland. So they were very close. They were also close in age. And my mom's sister would come and visit us a couple of times a year and stay for a week or two. So she was a frequent witness to what was going on in our family, basically. And so I got the intuition to call her and talk to her or ask her about it, which was it was scary because our family, we didn't talk about sexual stuff. It just didn't happen, you know. And but I got the courage. And do you know, I said, I'm having memories of my dad doing really sexually inappropriate stuff with me. And she said, yes, Mary.
wow.
The first words out of her mouth. And she said, I sensed there was something highly inappropriate going on between you and your father. And then, because that's all I said to her, was that, you know, I'm having memories of him being sexually inappropriate. And then she went on to describe a scene she witnessed firsthand, where she said she was visiting and sitting in my room with me as a child, reading me a story, when he burst into the room, highly agitated, looking for me. And when she said this,
Wow.
It was such a shock, because that was exactly one of the scenes I was remembering in my memories. So it was this huge validation. And yeah, but it was great, because I needed that in the beginning. I needed some kind of validation that I wasn't just losing my mind, or like, where was this stuff coming from? So
That's another
yeah.
thing I think is so
Okay.
typical, right? That, I mean, I felt that too when my memories started to come out. I think we question, like, are we crazy? Are we making this up? Like, is this even humanly possible? And
Right.
and I've had the same experience where things were validated, or pieces that were missing kind of fit lock and step into the memory. And so I'm glad that you had that confirmation, because that's a very difficult part of the process when the memories come
Yeah.
back, is believing ourselves, right?
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I'm so grateful. A lot of my flashbacks have very powerful body memories attached, you know, with them, because that's the one thing that is impossible for me to deny or to question. I mean, it's just so strong. And I've heard from so many people who have dedicated their lives to researching, you know, the human psyche, and that the body doesn't lie. The body tells the truth every time. So,
exactly.
yeah. So, let's see.
So it started.
Well, how about I just,
yeah.
how about I just tell about growing up, and then I'll get to the point where I started to remember, and then I'll go into the memories themselves. Okay, because I grew up very depressed, and my mom started to leave my father periodically, and she'd rent a house, usually out in Long Island for the summer. Or like she told me in the beginning, she would take us to a hotel for the weekend in the beginning, and then it kind of evolved into taking us for months to, you know, in the summer somewhere. And but he would always get her back one way or the other. I think he'd make promises and they'd try it again, or he even bought at one point a very beautiful, expensive at that time home in an exclusive area of Long Island. And I think they made these big plans, you know. And I remember living there when I was a child. I was about 9 or 10. But things got so crazy in that house with my father. His alcoholism was progressing, and he was becoming more and more erratic and cruel and bizarre in his behavior. And I was about 8 or 9, and I was just starting to, I think, become an adolescent. And I remember waking up and starting to feel resentment towards my dad, and like pushing him away mentally, saying, I'm not going to take this. Before, I'd just been kind of battered by his abuse, but I was starting to be like, you know, this guy is a creep, you know, basically. And I have another memory of like he would, this was like an example of bizarre behavior. We had a huge lawn in the front and grounds. It was like 1.5 acres or 2 acres of land around our house. And he refused to pay a gardening group to fix it. And he'd be out there, you know, drunk and mowing the grass himself. And I remember he came in once, and I was practicing the piano in the living room. And he looked at me with such loathing. And he wiped the sweat from his brow and flicked it on me, like, you, like, as if to say, you know, I hate you. I can't stand you. And I remember thinking, and then he left, and I remember pausing and saying to myself, I have got to get out of here. At 9, I've got to find a way to get out of here, you know? But luckily for me, my mom was waking up. She was getting out of denial. She was empowering herself. She had some nun friends who had gone on to become psychologists. And she had one in particular that she was really good friends with, and she would go visit her for counseling. And God bless this woman. She told my mom, you need to get away from your husband. You need to take your children and get out of his life. You know, you can't. And so she started taking money from my dad, and she told me she would find $50 bills in his jacket pockets. He would give her his jackets to be cleaned, and she'd find this money, and he kept money, and he kept cash in different parts of the house. And she began putting it away. And $50 in the 60s was a lot. It was like $450 now. Yeah. So, and my youngest brother, by this time there was 4 children, and my youngest brother was only 6 weeks old when she took us all and we flew back and moved to Ireland, and where we had a summer home. My dad had bought a summer home there. And that I think saved my life, and I think it got me out of what my father was up to with me as a child, you know. So yeah, I guess I'll go into some of the memories, but I just wanted to stress that I didn't have any kind of recollection at that time as a child. But basically, what was going on with my dad, and these memories started coming back in around 47, when I was around 47, 48 years old. He was taking me to different locations when he took me to work, as far as I remember. The first memories that came back were ones of, I was in a basement in a bar, because I remember being led down. Someone had my hand and I looked over and I saw the bar stools in the bar, and I was taken through a door and led downstairs. So I guess it was a basement or a cellar. And there were a group of men there. And there were other children. I'm not sure if the first memory, I have quite a few memories of this kind of scene happening, but the general thing was usually there were other children, and there would either be, and I remember thinking I made up this word, some kind of ritualistic abuse going on of the children. And I thought I made up the phrase ritual abuse. And, but there was also, it seemed like there was also sexual abuse of children, and sometimes there'd be photography. So it just seems like there was someone with a camera would show up all of a sudden, and, you know, so there seems to be this mix of things. And I remember one time when I went down, as a child, I was very sensitive and perceptive. And I remember looking at I saw some of the faces of these men. And I guess I didn't have the word for it, but I knew that they felt powerless. They looked weak and powerless, and that they were doing this to gain a sense of power and strength. And I saw children, well, they threatened us. There was a sack tied with a rope above our heads, and there was several children there, and they said it was a child in that sack who had spoken, and they like hit it with a stick and did all these things, and it was terrifying as a child. And so I was and then I would have similar memories in other locations. One in particular, it also seemed like in some kind of a basement or cellar-like place, and there was a woman there. It was mostly men, but sometimes I would see a woman. And they were having some kind of a ceremony or something where I did see what looked like a baby being brought out on a kind of platter thing, and there was like a ritualistic kind of cutting of the child and the blood and everything, and then too, and I actually did a drawing of it, and it's so horrific to me that at the time, especially, like I was so afraid that someone would see this drawing and think I was just really, I don't know, but and the children were there, but they were there primarily to satisfy these men sexually while this ceremony was going on. And so I remember seeing other children being abused, and I was abused. And yeah, I'm going to take a drink of water.
Yeah, yeah, just take a breath. This is such, it's the horror of it and the terror of it is something that, I mean, I understand because I've seen the same thing. It shouldn't even occur. It's not even in the realm of what a human being should see or experience. It's literally interacting with evil itself, with Satan itself. And it's so intense and so terrifying and horrifying that I don't even know how we're here today, honestly, and like, functional. Because I mean,
Yeah.
it's a testament to our strength and to the light of God and healing. But my God, I mean, even when you're telling me, and I've been through that, I'm sitting here, finding it hard to breathe. So let's take a breath before you go on.
Yeah, I do want to say that some of my memories, I think I was brought to different groups, and I think some of them I'm pretty sure were satanic, but there may have been other ritualistic kind of groups that were not necessarily satanic. They may have been some kind of other religion, but it was always this dark, heavy energy where it involved death or hurting someone or having sex with a child as part of their. So I just want to be clear that I can't say definitively it was all satanic abuse. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'll explain a little more later too about that, because so when these memories were coming back, I also started to have mixed in with these ritual kind of memories, memories of being taken to what I describe as a lab-like facility where it looks very clinical, with the tile floor, and a lot of times there would be electronics. I'd see a lot of electronic equipment, very bright light over above, and that kind of sense of lots of metal and that doctor office kind of feel, but in a bigger space. And I was oftentimes strapped to a chair. And this is when my body memories were very, very, and they still are, very strong, like straps on my wrists, straps on my ankles. And sometimes I would see wires taped to the back of my hand or somehow fixed onto the back of my hand, and my hands would ache. And there was something on my head, and there was intense pain at my temples, and it was some kind of a helmet-like thing on top, or I always draw it as bands of metal or.
Yeah.
Really?
I can validate that 100%. That was put on me. It's like, it's a helmet made of bands, and then there's wires and stuff coming out that attach to some bigger kind of machine or whatever. And
right.
My uncle's facility was exactly what you're describing, this large kind of cold medical clinical place with all kinds of technology and things like that. So 100%, I have been through the same stuff. Matter of fact, I've seen your artwork about that, and when I saw it, it was really powerful to me, because I thought, oh my God, I've seen this before. So yeah, so go ahead. I mean, I'm just validating that I have been through the exact same stuff.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I'm sorry that. Ugh.
But I think I was brought to. There was, but there was a memory where I was brought to, it looked like a large and kind of luxurious apartment where it seemed to me that the man who lived there had a doctor's office in the apartment. Mm-hmm. It was so large, like it was a room that had been converted into a doctor's office. And I remember being, seeing the metal cabinets with the glass, in medical facilities, and they'd open them and they'd be all the the things they need in there. And yeah, like even cotton swabs and, all that kind of stuff. And he had an examination table and I was on that, and they were torturing me. They were hurting me very badly, a lot of times in my genital area. And of course I was terrified as a child. And I remember becoming so overwhelmed, that I would eventually dissociate, that's what I know it is now, but at the time I called it leaving my body or floating away. And I remember, and I have very powerful flashbacks of the sensation of leaving my body, but I wasn't actually leaving it. I think I was disconnecting from the physical body as a way to preserve my sanity or something, because the pain and overwhelm was so intense for a child, And I remember wanting to do that when, there seemed to be a certain point where I could do that. And I remember wanting to dissociate when things started to be very, very painful, and kind of longing for it at times, because it wouldn't completely always eliminate the pain, but it would numb it to such a degree it was much more manageable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with our brains, when we're in danger and survival, there's this fight or flight. But when you can't flee the situation or fight it off, the only other choice is to split your consciousness, to dissociate and to leave that scene. So that is totally classic for anyone who's been even in lesser, I'm going to say traumatic situations than ours, but that's a normal thing. And I just want to say real quick to validate something else you said. I also, in all my years of being ritually abused and tortured, there was always the doctor, some figure called the doctor, who injected me with stuff and participated in the experiments. And I've heard this from other survivors too. There's always this figure that they call the doctor. So I just wanted to validate that aspect of what you said.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, because they're often, I remember that too, doctor. And I believe this man also in this apartment had a room. It looked like it had been maybe a big walk-in closet at one point. It was kind of long and narrow. And he had an altar set up in there. And he would take me in there with him. And I remember he would sit on the floor. We'd sit on the carpeting with cushions, because the altar was kind of low on the ground, not too high up. And it was as if he was training me. He would use pain. And then there would be this ritual thing happening with the altar. But I think that was the early stages of teaching me to endure pain and to be obedient. And but then it was mixed in with this weird affection kind of thing. Like he was so proud of me for being able to withstand the pain. And that was really bizarre. And I was really young at that time. And, but that seemed to be a part of his apartment, this guy, And so Yeah. Some of the other things I remember were, was in the lab areas, I started seeing swastikas in various situations, either an armband or a banner on the wall, which was so hard for me to accept when I first saw that banner. That's when I really, you talk about thinking you're losing your mind, but I was like, swastikas? Like, what the heck? And then I also had a big memory, which I drew a very detailed drawing of being, I guess I was given to someone for the night, and I was in a room. He actually had a bathroom attached to this room, and he had a banner with a swastika on it on the wall. And he was older, and I remember he wore a gun holster at one point, and he abused me pretty horribly, but he also did a little ritual, it seemed like, at one point. And he had hypodermic where he was doing drugs, or it was used to extract blood or something as part of the ritual or something. But this was an incredibly intense time for me when these memories started coming back, because I really was so terrified. I did not know what was going on. But luckily I had a therapist. I had been seeing about my father's sexual abuse, just the stuff I remembered in my childhood home. And I realized she was a huge gift to me, because when I actually had to stop seeing her right as these ritual memories were starting to come back, because I had moved and we couldn't, because of the laws, I couldn't continue to see her. And she validated, she said, Mary, because she had been working with me for 7 years at that point, but we only saw each other I think it was every other week, or and in the beginning or something. And so she said to me, because I came to her with I could barely even tell her, although I trusted her. Some of the images were so shocking to me, I had a hard time even telling her, but I told her a little bit. And she said to me, Mary, she said, because I cried, I broke down crying, and I said, I think I'm losing my mind. And she said to me, Sparrow, you are not crazy. I have been working with you for 6 or 7 years now, and I would know if you were crazy. And she said, what? And she told me that the psyche is very protective of itself. It does not want me to go crazy or kill myself. And it will only reveal information when it knows, and this is what she said to me, when it knows you're strong enough and you have enough support to handle the information.
100%. Yeah.
And that was huge for me, because I really did respect her. She was compassionate and very intelligent woman. And she said, you're getting these images now and these memories because your psyche knows that you're strong enough to handle it and you've got enough support. And that was huge for me. So yeah, so I let's see. So I was also in a program at that time. It was like an inner city program, because I didn't have a lot of money at the time. That the universe, led me to this program, which was and this was after when my father's memories had started to come back. And I remember reading a couple of books about incest, and they all said, do not try and heal yourself with this alone. Get a therapist, get a group some kind of a therapy group. And so I was kind of looking and putting it out there, and I ended up connecting with this program, inner city program for women survivors who were assaulted or trafficked sexually. It was free program. I had Medi-Cal at the time, which is the American public assistance thing. And this place was absolutely amazing because every single counselor was and therapist there was a survivor herself.
Wow.
I know. And so there was this I had this incredible sense of, I can tell these women anything, and they're just gonna. But this was before the ritual abuse. But then I was actually in that program twice. They told me, we think you need this program again. And they enrolled me. It was like a 6-month program, and they gave me another 6 months, which was so beautiful of them. They really saw something in me I didn't see at the time, and I had this absolutely amazing woman who was a acupuncturist. That was the other thing about this program, was all the healing modalities were holistic.
Wow.
I got Reiki, I got acupuncture, we got group therapy, and I really and I even got yoga classes. And that environment was because I really fell in love with yoga, was starting to get connected to my body in a beautiful way. And then the acupuncture, she gave me multiple full body acupuncture layouts, and I really got into that. It just felt good at such a deep level. And I remember my therapist at the time was Chinese, and she goes, I'm jealous. She goes, do you know how much it costs for a full body acupuncture? And I must have gotten 7 or 8 of them over my year there. And I was able to ask the acupuncturist. She was European, she was from Italy, and she had the most soulful eyes, where she would just look right into your soul. And she was one other person I was able to start to tell a little bit about these memories. And she was very validating. She's like, respect that, respect your body. If it's coming out of your body, especially, just to honor that. And she also validated that you're not losing your mind. I'm watching you get better and better as you're in this program. You're doing actually really well. So I just want to, surround some of these memories with this sense of, there was healing modalities in my life that I was really relying on. I used to go to that program 3 times a week for at least 2 hours a visit, because that was the minimum, but I was often there longer. I was taking yoga. And so I think the yoga too really helped to start unlock the memories that were trapped in my body. Yeah. Because I remember I was super attracted to spinal twists. I would really get into these deep spinal twists. And I found out later that we carry a lot of memories in our spine. Yeah. So I think I was literally unlocking energy and memories from my body with the acupuncture and the counseling and everything,
It's amazing how you were getting exactly what you needed by your higher self, God, whatever you want to call that, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just incredible. I love hearing that. And, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, It's about trauma. He actually says in there that yoga, dance, and martial arts are the 3 top physical things to do if you're heavily traumatized to help you heal.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Because when I grew up in my 20s, I lived in New York City, and I worked in the club scene, the nightclub scene there, and I very gradually came out of my shell and started dancing. I'd pick a really like isolated spot on the dance floor in the shadows and dance. But I think that was one of my first healing experiences of being really aware of how much better I felt after I had been dancing for 20 minutes, a half an hour. Something about the music and the rhythm and even the lights they would use in the club were kind of therapeutic, and I would feel this flow and this release of all this tension I carried around as a wounded 20-year-old. And I think it also helped me feel the connection to my spirit, my higher self, like you were talking, because I'd get into this flow and this rhythm. So that's impressive to me, to see how we gravitate towards, or I did. I gravitated.
I think when you have the intent to heal, when it starts, and you're right, for me, my memories came back in my early 40s. So that's, fairly similar after I had my daughter. But with how much we had to dissociate and leave our bodies, dance and yoga, and I took up kickboxing. So that's what did it for me. And it was very empowering that my body got to fight, because for so many times, for the first 18 years of my life, I was, raped and sexually abused and all that. And you can't do anything, right? You're helpless and powerless. So that's why I think martial arts is a big one too, because your body gets that chance to be powerful and empowered and fight. So, but I dance in my bathroom at night before I go to bed. I just put on music and dance. And the dancing, I think it's the joy and but we've held the trauma so tightly that the dancing is like opening it up, right? And just expressing. And so I find dancing wonderful as well. So, I mean, how amazing that you got into this program for free and got to do it twice, and had the therapist who validated you and said, this is, you're not crazy. I mean, all the perfect pieces for you to recover yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That, looking back, because I felt very hopeless and isolated at the time, but I did have a meditation practice, a spiritual practice, because I was attending 12-step meetings, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, ACA, and Codependents Anonymous for years, as my daughter was growing up. But I'm jumping all over the place. I do want to talk about some more of the rituals and the things I saw, because I realized when you said the word rape, I realized I'm afraid to say that word. And I think that's part of their intimidation and programming.
Yeah.
But it was rape. Yeah. And I would leave my body. I have drawings where the perspective is from the ceiling of what's going on to me. I'm on the table with these. And in fact, a lot of these ritual places, they almost seemed like having an orgy or having sex with a child, defiling innocence, was some kind of an offering to this entity they worshipped.
Agree. Yeah.
They just like that, because that's about as dark as you can get, to hurt a child, rape a child. And so that was the most powerful offering. And let's see, the other thing that came out in my memories, that this is a good example of me trusting my perception in the flashback. I was in a lab-like setting, and I would see men in white lab coats. And I did have a sense that some of the men were the doctors, you know. And I'd also see people in military uniform, and I'd also see small groups of observers sometimes come in, and I'd see a woman in a kind of a woman's business suit, and they'd have clipboards and they'd be taking notes, but they'd be at a distance watching what was going on. And it seemed to me they were, I have memories of them bombarding me with messages over and over, and it was the mind attempting to control my mind as far as how I would think and even how I would feel. I remember them focusing on wanting me to feel a sense of honor, that I was chosen to, they used the phrase, serve the masters of the ceremonies. I heard that phrase sometimes. And the other images that I find difficult to accept are seeing a child in a cage, kept in a cage. And I was kept in a cage at times. And there was even one place I was brought to. It was huge, and I realize now it must have been like some kind of a warehouse or an airport hangar, stories tall, but it was all one big room, and there were levels on the wall, kind of balconies, if you will, wide ones, multiple levels of them, and they had cages on them.
Yeah.
Where I saw children being kept. Not all of them were full, but there was some kind of, I think there were ladders between the different levels, but there also was some kind of an elevator at the side.
Wow.
That was so bizarre for me to see, because that implied, that was the terror for me too, when I was seeing the military uniforms and the level of organization it must have taken to achieve something like that, and I remember seeing children, I remember being brought to one of those cages, and seeing children who were very sick, very ill, weak. And I remember being visited there in that cage while I was there by clinical people with their little boards they wrote on, their papers, clipboards. And so, yeah, so these memories were coming back. And very, very powerfully. Luckily for me, I had gotten disability. I was so PTSD'd. That's what I realize now, but I was so damaged in my 20s, I couldn't function very well.
Yeah.
I had returned to New York because I got accepted. I had high grades though, believe it or not. I managed to function up until about junior year of high school. And then kind of my senior year, everything kind of fell through. My mom had moved many times, and I didn't have a stable friend base. I was a teenager, and my mom was also very stressed, having 4 kids on her own. My dad did not wish, the way my dad tried to get her back was by refusing to support her financially. And so she she actually tried to take him to court about it, but she told me she thought he had friends in City Hall in New York, and some delay would come about, or he wouldn't show up, and they kept pushing the cases back and back, So she ended up supporting four kids on her own. She was highly stressed. She told me she had a walking nervous breakdown for years. And she told me this later. And but she was physically abusing me a lot. She was dumping a lot of her stress on me, and it was so. By the time I was in senior in high school, I had had enough. I realized no matter how well I performed in school, it wasn't going to change what was happening at home with the raging and the violence from my mom. But I managed, I think my test scores, I actually wasn't able to graduate high school because I was skipping classes, but I had to make up classes in summer school. And but my test scores were so high, I got a scholarship to Fordham University in New York. And I decided I wanted to go back to New York and meet my dad. I hadn't seen him in 10 years, and I hadn't any memories at that point of the abuse. And I ended up connecting with him in New York, which was very interesting. He had lost everything. Absolutely everything. He was living in a studio apartment in Queens, New York, working as a cab driver. He lost all his businesses. And I'm still not clear how that happened, but my mom did mention something about taxes or a bad check. I don't know. But it was his alcoholism as well, I'm sure. And so
no doubt that was part of it, yeah.
But anyway, he seemed like a very broken man. But he was there was a very kind of kind, broken side to my father, which has always been so hard for me to accept. I think he was so deeply split himself, his personality.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, he seemed happy to see me. We went out to a couple of places, but his alcoholism, my one condition for seeing him was that he didn't drink while I was with him. And he couldn't even do that. We used to drive in his cab for a couple of hours on Sundays because it was my day off from school, and I figured it was a way to get to know my dad. And we did that a couple of times, and then one day he stopped the cab and said, "I'll be right back," and he went into a bar. And I think I got out and followed him. And he took a shot of whiskey and a beer chaser and then proceeded to get back in the cab. Like, he couldn't go 2 hours without a drink, So I stopped seeing him. I stopped going in the cab. I was scared.
Yeah. Well, good. It sounds like, I mean, with your dad, there's different ways people get into these satanic groups, and probably he was vulnerable because he was already an alcoholic and very stressed out, and he owned bars, which, can have these basement cellars. And so from what I know, people get recruited in, and he would have had a lot of money being given to him for bringing you there and all of that, right? And then I wanted to say something about what you said earlier with the Nazi, with the swastika, right? I mean, you probably are aware that the Nazis who experimented on people during World War II were brought over to America, and they were the foundation of MK-Ultra and the mind control programs, right? And the swastika is also a symbol. There's one group of satanic elites. There's different groups of them, right? And one of them is they come from the Order of the Black Sun, and their emblem looks a lot like the swastika. So that was interesting to me when you said that. So it all
Oh,
ties
wow.
together, you know? And so, yeah, so they are behind the Nazis brought that science with them on how to mind control. And, you know, they weren't punished. They were, you know, used to help develop the programs that the CIA then ran on a bunch of people.
Hmm.
So, you know, so everything you've said is really verifiable, you know, and is very, I mean, I've been through everything you've talked about, I can relate to. And
Wow.
so yeah, so it's so interesting. And you know, so of course your dad probably, you know, at some point, God knows what happened to him that made him open to joining these satanic groups and going and doing all that stuff, right? But clearly, you know, we don't know what happened to him, but I think it's really beautiful that you tried to get to know him and reconnect with him, because you could see then it must have done something for you in your healing, because he was this terrifying monster and then he was this broken
Right.
man, right?
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that's very true. And well, I did get a memory. I strongly suspect or feel that my dad's family may have been practicing occultists themselves,
Okay.
and that maybe he was brought in. I have a one memory of being very small in bed and it being very dark in my room and seeing three figures around my bed and some kind of incantation going on. And I know that when my parents were newlyweds, my dad's two sisters actually lived with us in our home, which was, even my mom said, was so, even, you know, it's, why would two sisters live with their dad? But they were both nurses. And there was actually one time when he was in a car wreck and he didn't want to go to the hospital, and they took care of him at home. He didn't want to have, because he knew that he'd have to stop drinking if he went to the hospital. So I later on I had more things. Well, I always got a weird vibe from my dad's family as a child. Like there was kind of an offness to them and a slight darkness to them,
So maybe he
even
was,
though they were very,
maybe he was
yeah,
also
born
put
into that.
through, yeah, it might, your family might be a generational ritual abuse family. So he may have been put through that stuff and he never healed. He just acted it out, right? So
That's right. That's right. And I also suspect the military spotted him as a good candidate for mind control
yeah,
himself.
yeah, yeah.
Because I have memories of being in that lab place we were talking about earlier with the electronics, and I'm in the chair and they're hurting me very badly. And my dad would be there, but he would have this totally glazed
Yeah.
look on his face. And I would be trying to catch his eye as a child because I want, you know,
Right.
to get him to help me. And it was just empty, you know, almost.
Yeah. Well,
I think I did a drawing. I called him a zombie at one drawing, you know, like.
so he was
So I'm wondering
dissociated.
if he was partially mind controlled too in
Yeah.
some program or something.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. Yeah. Wow.
So it's such a weird, I have such a weird mix of compassion for my dad, but then these memories of him being a monster, absolute.
Right.
Because he'd be part of these rituals where I was being hurt,
Right.
you know, or tortured by these people, you know, so
Well,
yeah.
I appreciate you having the courage to sort of really describe these things. I think it's important. And every survivor I've ever interviewed, there's pieces of your story that are identical, including my own, right? So, you know, I appreciate you. I know it was hard for you to share that, all of that, and I really appreciate that very much. And kind of as we wrap up, like, I'm just curious about your healing process. Like, how are you where you are today? Because all of us have miraculous, really, healing and recovery. So I think that's an important part for people that might be listening. Like, how did you heal and recover yourself?
Well, I guess briefly, I give a brief synopsis over the years, but in my late 20s, I was bottoming out in New York City in the music scene, and I couldn't hold a job for very long, so kind of dropped out of society. And there were a lot of kids like me on the Lower East Side of Manhattan at the time. It was a ghetto, but there were a lot of artists living there because the rents were so cheap. This was the 1980s. And I would read a lot, though. My mom had instilled that love of reading in me. But I had started using drugs, heroin,
Oh, wow.
and I was living very dangerously. I had such low self-esteem and worthlessness. I was putting myself in dangerous. It was a dangerous neighborhood. A lot of drugs being dealt down there, and I was living in abandoned buildings with other kids, and I think we were all very similar in a lot of ways because of the artwork we were drawn to, the imagery. I kind of have a theory that they were also either let go out of programs similar to me.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, I started going, I remember hanging out at a bookstore I really liked, and I found books. It was a metaphysical bookstore. And I found books that were really speaking to me at a deep level. It was channeled information at the time. And I also started hearing about 12-step groups. And I started sporadically dropping in. There was a big meeting center on the Lower East Side on St. Mark's Place. And there were meetings there 24, almost 24 hours a day. And I'd go in there and drop in. There was a part of me that really was questioning why I was so damaged and so depressed, and so my negative thinking was so intense. And so I took to these books and to the kind of the message of 12-step, which was about recovery, but it was so down to earth. It was so nitty gritty at the same time. So I eventually left New York. I had a friend who grew up in California, and she said, come to San Francisco, because I was starting to really want to dedicate myself to healing myself. I kind of figured out I need to focus on this. And I knew New York was not the place to do it for me. So she invited me out to San Francisco. And I eventually started going more and more to 12-step, and I had a child. And my daughter actually, I had stopped going to meetings when she was born because I told myself I don't need them anymore, and I have a child now and I need to take care of her. But when she was around the age of 5, I started raging at her like my mother would rage at me. And it was something I felt totally out of control. She was triggering something. My daughter was innocently triggering something, just being a child.
Right.
And it became a crisis for me where I tried to stop on my own and I couldn't. So I didn't want to live anymore because I swore the only reason I had a child was I thought I could not be like my mother. Right. So I ended up going to a therapist, which was huge for me. I was very isolated and frightened. And the therapist was great. And she told me, I feel we have been brought together for me to tell you that you have to go to 12-step meetings to heal. You're a classic adult child of a dysfunctional family. You're isolating, and if you don't start breaking out of isolation, you're not going to heal. And I was desperate enough and respected her enough to take action on her advice, even though it was terrifying for me. But that started a journey with 12-step. And then my love for my daughter just was very deep. It grew even deeper the more I healed. And I felt there were times when I really didn't want to live, even in recovery. But I felt I had committed to her. I didn't want to abandon her in this life. And she had shown me so much pure joy. Like I honestly thought, I can only be happy when I take drugs or alcohol. Like I honestly felt that. I had such little joy. And here was this bundle of, I mean, she'd come in the morning and start jumping on my bed on the weekend saying, yay, it's Saturday or whatever, you know. So I wanted what she had, and I wanted to be there for her. And I love the 12-step program. I'm an avid reader. So I actually had a therapist told me, she says, you have a very good understanding of codependency and adult, you know, dysfunctional family systems and all this stuff. And I was journaling, and my creativity started up to come alive. It had been repressed for many, many years. And I found a book about, it's called Reclaiming, what is it called? Life, Paint, and Passion, Reclaiming the Magic of Spontaneous Self-Expression. And it said, you don't have to have training to be an artist. You just have to have the courage to put down the image that you are receiving to put down, that you want to draw. And that started me on a journey where it's also called intuitive art, where you're just drawing whatever comes into the mind, you put it down. And the funny thing is, my subconscious was giving me clues even before my memories surfaced, where I was doing paintings where there'd be swastikas in them. And I'd be pretty horrified. I'd be like, what is up? You know? So the combination of 12-step, my artwork, I also had disability, so I was able to devote a lot of time to my healing and the art. And then the groups and people I met along the way, when the memories started to come back, being led to these different groups and healing modalities. Like, I have a meditation practice that I really love. It's actually one of the books I found all those years ago in that little shop in New York. She has a whole series of books, and her work really speaks to me deeply. And she has guided meditations I do to access my inner strength, my, what I call my soul or my higher self, that I believe there's a core of power and strength and love within me at my core, and that I can, and this took a long time for me to trust this and to try it, but over the years, I've learned to rely on that core part of me when I'm feeling afraid or discouraged. But I'm still very much in a healing place right now. I'm still having flashbacks. I had a very powerful flashback yesterday, and I won't lie. It's gotten, the more as time passed, it's been 10 years now, over 10 years since my memories first surfaced. I still have intense periods where I'm dealing with the mind control, with suicide programming, because I really think they didn't want me to stay alive. I think they let me go out of the program, but they programmed me to self-destruct.
Yep.
So, but my art, if I focus on my art, the art is everything for me right now. And I'm just, it brings me such peace, even when these horrors are coming back, these horrible memories. It kind of grounds me and allows me to focus on what I'm doing. And then I can step back periodically. What happens is the part that is communicating inside of me through the drawing will cry. So it's a combination of drawing and then having a deep cry and then going back to the drawing again. But it's brought so much peace into my life and joy and a sense of fulfillment, because the idea that I am creating out of that hell,
Yeah.
I am creating something that can help someone else. Because I've had a couple of survivors tell me it's a horrific image, but it's so validating at the same time. Yes. You know?
I've told you that when I saw your art, it was so powerful, because those scenes you draw are scenes that I've been through, and you are a really good artist, by the way. And you know, when one of the times I was in therapy, when I started, and it's similar, I started to recover memories of like sexual abuse and torment from my mother. And then only later did my uncle come in the picture, and the facility and the rituals and all that. But that therapist had said, use your left hand, because I'm right-handed, and just start drawing. Just don't even think. And these images would come out with crosses. You know, I was taken into the Vatican and priests, and I was like, what the hell am I drawing? Because at that point, I still had no memory. So it does access the memories, and it's very, very healing, I think. So I understand why you say it's healing for you, because you're taking these things and you're literally removing them from you and putting them down externally. And then everybody else who sees that is validated. I was validated when I saw your art, you know?
Wow.
So I think it's also so beautiful that you talked about your daughter. You know, when I had my daughter, that was a huge piece of my healing too. And because I was going through my memories when she was already here, and I wanted to kill myself every single day when the memories would come through.
Wow.
You know? And it was that suicide program built into us. If you tell, you have to kill yourself. And and my daughter is why I didn't, because I couldn't do that to her, you know?
That's right.
God put her in, then enabled me to go through the memories. And then, like you say, that love and seeing the way a child should be, innocent and joyful, and they're so unconditionally loving, and we didn't get that. Yeah. So so it's so beautiful to hear that part of your healing too. I really resonate with that. So, and I did not go through addiction myself, but I know the 12-step program has helped so many people, you know. So I'm so glad that, that's the way it is, you know. You get the piece of healing, and the next and the next and the next that you need. And I don't think our healing is ever done, probably, till we leave this body. I mean, I had a lot of intense flashbacks and memories, and they came through nightmares and everything. And so nowadays I can say that it's not often, but I too still, I mean, in Easter, I had a lot of flashbacks about rituals that they did at that time. Wow. And so, you know, it's just part of the process, but we're so strong now, right? That we can receive the flashback. And then the crying is so good, because we need to release all the emotions that were stuck in there with the trauma. And so it's brilliant that you're drawing, emoting, releasing, healing, drawing some more. Like it's just such a beautiful healing path. So was there anything else that has helped you with your healing? Or is now nature?
Well, I do want to revisit my daughter, because I like you said, she's just been such an incredible part of my healing, in that there were times too where I remember when she was young, I had such low self-esteem and depression. I didn't even value myself enough to go on, heal myself. But I wanted to be a good mom to her. I wanted to be a loving mom, and I knew I could improve a lot in that area. So, yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say was the flashbacks are not as intense as they were in the first few years, and they're not as often. I was having, it seemed like, multiple powerful flashbacks a day, and I felt like that's all I was doing, was processing, getting food and eating food, and then going to a 12-step meeting and maybe the park. But that was my life, just the processing. And now it's more like you said, I'm stronger. I'm much more less afraid of them. And I have so many skills and awareness I've learned to help me. The other part that's been very helpful is meeting other survivors. I actually, when I was in early AA, I eventually got into AA recovery. And taking away alcohol, I think, was what opened the door on the memories as well, because I was 2 years sober, completely sober.
Oh, yeah. After
being in Codependence Anonymous and ACA for years and years, I finally had to let go of the alcohol. I thought I was functional, but it was getting out of hand. And so,
well, it masks the pain and the memories. I mean, that's why I think all addictions are based on trauma, and the fact that the trauma is so big and you can't deal with it, that you have to, erase it with the drugs and alcohol. So it makes sense. So obviously when you stop, you allow these things to emerge, right?
That's right. It was like a year and a half, 2 years after I was sober that they came out. So they started coming out. But nature is a huge healer for me. The natural world. In fact, when we went to Ireland when I was a kid, we lived on, it's called Bray Head. It was like a hill in a forest, but it was big. And I was allowed, my mother felt comfortable letting me go explore in the woods by myself and through the fields. There was a ruin of an ancient church there. I used to play in the rubble of the church, and immersing myself in nature like that was so, and to this day, I am, I would spend hours out there as a child by myself playing. And then I would, when the flashbacks started, I figured out that if I went to the park, we had a small park. It was a city park, but it was long and lots of trees. And if I sat in that park for 20 minutes, my whole system would calm down. Yeah. And it was noticeable. Yeah. I would go from the verge of feeling I was losing my mind, I was really going to lose it, to being fine after 20 minutes, half an hour, sitting in the grass. And I've heard that the balance, nature is so inherently balanced and harmonious and abundant and alive that it can't help but affect my energy field in a positive way. Yep. If I immerse myself in it, so
it soothes the nervous system. And conversely, screens, which are helpful, technology is useful to us, but I find after being on a screen for a while, I start to feel agitated. The electromagnetic frequencies from cell towers, the phones, I mean, that stresses our nervous system, and nature soothes it. I mean, when I take walks, I have a dog, so I get out in nature a lot. Sometimes I'll go to a tree and just hug it for a while to feel that vibration of the tree, right? It's like just totally soothing. So I hear you. Nature, I think nature's healing for everyone, whether you know it or not. So if you're stressed out, go out in nature and try hugging a tree. It really works.
I know. I agree.
Wow.
Um,
So you're still on your journey and you
yeah.
are still drawing, and we're going to add the drawings into this interview because they are so powerful. And so any last thoughts that you want to kind of leave people with? Because I think people are going to be inspired by how you've been able to bring yourself back from all that. I mean, that would kill most people, right? So do you want to say anything to the viewers as your final kind of thoughts here?
Um, well, I do want to offer too. I guess we can put a link in it with the video, but I do have an Instagram account and a website where people can view more art and my story, and more, maybe there'll be details in this on my website about my story that will be helpful to others. I also have a list of resources that help me on my website. And
So what is your website?
but
We will put it in the links, but you can say it too. What is it? How can
it's
people find you?
Sparrow, Sparrow, and then the number 4, and ever free, sparrowforeverfree.com. And yeah, and what I want to say is, I really feel that asking the universe for help is what started everything for me. You know, believing that maybe I was so distrustful that I would say things like, if you're out there and if you really care about me, will you please help me? That was my prayer. You know, I was so uncertain, but asking for help and then being willing to take small steps as it comes to ideas that come to you, or someone would give me a book, or I'd meet someone, we'd have a conversation. And that's what happened when I got into that incredible healing program the women survivors ran. I was in another group for parenting at the time, and a woman said, "Oh, there's an all-day workshop for incest survivors at City College." And you know, I was scared, but I felt her telling me there was something about the way she told me, and I got the courage and went. And that was where I met the woman who did acupuncture. She had gone to that conference too. And so it's like, I honestly feel that there is a spiritual world full of guides and higher beings of light and love who really do care about me, and they care about all of us. And that I have a part of me that's very wise, but it took time for me to develop that trust. But I think if you're starting out on this recovery process, to at least keep the door open, even if you don't feel it or believe it, that there might be something in the universe that really wants to help you and will help you if you ask, you know?
Wow.
Because I believe the souls who take on this lifetime are incredibly powerful souls who have the skills and have the resources spiritually to move through it. Even if you don't have money. I didn't have money. I've been living at a survival level for many, many years. And I found a channeled book that said you don't need money to heal.
You don't.
And that was huge for me, because I couldn't afford some therapists or some groups, you know? But the universe did bring me people and groups that I was able to participate in that were very powerfully healing. I mean, that's another reason why I love the 12-step. You don't have to pay anything. If they ask for a contribution to pay for the hall, you know, they're renting or something. If you don't have the money, you don't have to give it. It's completely free. So I hope that answers your question, or was that what you're looking for?
No, that's perfect. And you know, what you said, I really agree with. I feel like we are warriors of the light, and we incarnated in this planet knowing it was run by dark Satanists, to make a difference, right? And I've heard someone say, I think the New Age says this, oh, you know, we chose to go into our lifetime and be abused and all that. I think that's a crock. I didn't choose to be tortured and trafficked and, you know, ritually abused. It's more like if you join the military, if a soldier joins up, they do so to be in service, knowing there's a risk that they may be tortured and killed, right? So that's how you see us. We came here and served. You don't go, a soldier doesn't go, well, I'm joining the army so I can be killed. I mean, you know, that's not the way that it works. But we took the risk and we came here, and we've experienced the absolute worst that this satanic Luciferian brotherhood that runs the planet has to offer. And yet we've healed, we've found our voice, you know, we're speaking out, we're telling our story, and we're telling people how we recovered and healed. And to some degree, everyone on this planet is traumatized because you can't be here without that occurring, right? And so if we can survive and if we can overcome, then everyone can. And I think that's one of the messages that we leave for people. Like, we've been through the worst and here we are. And and absolutely, the thing I love the most about what you said is when you have the intent to recover yourself and heal, God, the universe, your soul, whatever, will always put something in your path, and you just have to have the courage to take that step and avail yourself of that. Whether it's a book, whether it's 12-step, whether it's a therapist, whatever it is, we will always be helped along the way. And I know that what you say about mistrust, because that was crushed in us, but you know, you find that trust, and like AA says, you fake it till you make it, and you keep moving forward, right? So it's beautiful what you said, and thank you so much, Sparrow, for coming on and for talking about your life and sharing all of your journey, because I know you gave very powerful testimony, and it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you. I can't tell you what a gift it is to me to speak to someone who's willing to hear this, who's has an open heart and an open mind to receiving this kind of information, and not only that, but honoring it and respect, you know, in a respectful way. That to me is a huge gift in itself. You know, just this experience is very healing and empowering for me. So thank you for,
I'm so glad,
helping have it happen. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Carol.